Welcome to a open discussion where we will focus a little bit on the 2020 budget, what it means to our community. As we can all agree, it's in some cases very historic, and in some other places, I think people are wondering what's next, how we roll it out, how we deploy, and how do we take advantage of it. This afternoon, we have asked a few of our leaders, amazing individuals on the screen, to provide their perspective, a bit of overview, and also some detail. And at the beginning, I'd like to thank Richard Miller and the Keep Six organization for what they've done in terms of helping us to format and put this together. What we'll have is a 90-minute discussion with a 30-minute Q&A at the end. And please, if you're watching and you do have a question or concern, you can type those questions in your social media. We will get them, curate them, and try our very best to answer them. That being said, my name is Michael Carter. I am really, really happy to be here. And without further ado, I'd like to make some introductions in no particular order. And we'll start at the top of your screen. And welcome, Craig Wellington. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and maybe a briefness about the organization you represent?
Yes, thank you, Michael, and hello everyone here in studio, virtual studio, as well as everybody listening in. I'm Craig Wellington, the Executive Director of the Black Opportunity Fund, and the goal of the Black Opportunity Fund is very simple: to create the world's largest pool of sustainable funds to fund Black community initiatives. So the goal is over 10 years to develop a pool of $1.5 billion targeted at supporting Black community initiatives. And the model of the Black Opportunity Fund is not to be a Walmart. It's not to come in and reinvent the wheel. It's to look at how do we accelerate and add fuel to the cars that are already on the road doing great work. And the model is going to be about collaboration. The model is going to be about community, accelerating the community and working in partnership again with the great organizations that have been out there historically developing programs, but have a gap in terms of access to capital. So that is kind of the laser-like focus of the Black Opportunity.
Thank you, Craig. Welcome. Sarah, welcome, and please tell us a bit about yourself and a bit about the organization that you're a part of.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone, and good evening on this Saturday. My name is Sarah Ali, and I am a policy and research consultant, a background in community development consultant, right now with the organization International Decade for People of African Descent Canada representing. And we're pretty much putting on together for the last 2 years on the research in exactly what we're going to be discussing when it comes to the African descendant, and if the Canadian government have fulfilled the mandate that's been implemented by the United Nations.
Awesome. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you.
Ms. Paulette Senior.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon to my esteemed colleagues on the panel, as well as to all the folks listening in social media hemisphere. Paulette Senior, what I do for a living is I'm president and CEO of the Canadian Women's Foundation. And the Canadian Women's Foundation is a 30-year-old foundation, the only one of its kind in Canada that focuses on gender equality in Canada. We're part of a global network of women's funds that's headquartered in San Francisco and exist in various countries and continents around the world. We were founded by a group of women who believed that in order to achieve gender equality, we must, in fact, invest in women and girls to do that. We do our work from a lens of diversity and inclusion, and focus on those who are most marginalized, inclusive of Indigenous and Black and racialized women, girls, and gender diverse people. So that's the Canadian Women's Foundation. I've been doing this work now for over 3 decades, but I've been at the Canadian Women's Foundation for about 4.5 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulette. Welcome. Mr. Trevor, welcome, sir. Please tell us a bit more about you and the organization you represent.
Thank you, Michael. Very happy to be part of the panel. Good evening, everyone. Trevor McAlmont, Executive Director of Macaulay Child Development Center. We are a multi-service, multi-site community and childcare service organization, essentially providing early learning and childcare services, community parent services, and focusing on healthy development of the child. We're located northwest part of Toronto, serving a very, very diverse part of the city, including many multi sectors of oppression, many intersectionalities, and a marginalized demographic. So happy to be here and looking forward to this discussion on the 2021 budget.
Thank you, Trevor. Ms. Daniella Johnson, welcome. And could you tell us a bit about you?
Sure. Thank you, Michael, and good evening, everyone. My name is Daniella Johnson, and it really is an absolute pleasure to be a part of this panel discussion. So the experience that I'm bringing forward today is, working in settlement and integration, helping to support the settlement and integration of immigrants and refugees, working in partnership with community partners, and working with the Ontario Trillium Foundation to support the capacity building of nonprofit organizations. Most recently, I've worked with Lift Philanthropy partners to support social purpose organizations across Canada to grow and scale and to have greater measurable impact and really to become investment ready. So I bring with me to this discussion today that background and social impact lens as we consider the impacts of the budget when it comes to the Black community. I'm also very excited to share that another perspective I'm bringing forward today is that I'm seeking the nomination as the federal Liberal candidate for Brampton Centre. So as much as I'm here to contribute, I'm also here to listen and to learn. So with that, thank you, and I'm very glad to be here.
Thank you, Daniella. Mr. Richard Miller, welcome, sir. Happy to be working with you on this. I think this is a great initiative on behalf of you and your team. Please tell us a little bit about you. And if you wouldn't mind, even expand a little bit on why this afternoon was created and needed to be created.
Thank you, and welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you all here at the table today. I'm Richard, and I'm the founder of Keep Six nonprofit organization, which I founded in 2017. The organization itself was founded because of the disempowered that I found within our community, an individual that has gone through the justice system. I wanted to create something where I'm able to empower young people that has made mistakes in their lives or has taken a wrong path to correct that and be able to give them that support that they needed. Keep Six is a nonprofit organization that over the years has been supported and by myself and by the community. And I'm hoping that with that said, we are able to navigate through the stages of where we're able to get the support from the government for our programs. We have a program that we are launching on May 12th of this year with the City of Brampton and the Peel Regional Police, Gangs for Tuition. And that is a program that is give young people the opportunity to be in a tech industry sector or the trade industry sector with the training and support through Keep Six. And I look forward to hearing more about everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard. Emmanuel, please, I'd love to, first of all, great to see you, sir. Thank you for being here. It's an absolute pleasure. And if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to ask you to do double duty for a moment, which is just to give us an introduction of yourself. And then following that, would you mind, sir, just giving us an overview of this 2021 budget, where it sits, the journey that it's taken to get here, and maybe just some perspective of what you see in terms of community connection and government connection. Okay, so I'm asking you to do double duty on this intro, but I will leave it in your capable hands. You're on mute, by the way, man. There you are.
Okay. Thanks a lot, my brother Michael, and so pleased to get to know some of you in this panel and also to reconnect with friends in this panel. I think the opportunity for us to really pause within this week of the federal budget announcement and reflect the implications for Black community is the right thing to do, and it's so timely. My name is Amanuel Melles, and currently I consider myself as holding the space as the executive director for an amazing team of Black folks that are really working on pushing the agenda around systems change for Black communities. The Network for the Advancement of Black Communities that I'm part of does a number of things that are strategic in nature that focus on knowledge mobilization, convening, service coordination, capacity building, research. We all do this because we want to see a paradigm shift in terms of systems change. And I think I always describe the organization that I'm with, sitting at that interface between governments, funders, Philanthropy Canada, community sector leaders, and private sector leaders in terms of really creating a new mindset for all of us in terms of tackling some of the generational challenges Black communities have. In the context of our discussion today, I think it's quite important to really put the context of where we were and where we are, why this moment is so unique for us as Black communities across the country. I think part is to recognize that, we come into this space by really building on the shoulders and leadership of many Black leaders, community-based leaders, sector leaders, private sector leaders, and others that have actually always kept at the forefront of our struggle, if you want, Black liberation. And I think part of this is to try to really understand that the challenge that we are facing as Black communities, and we have been facing for quite some time, cannot be resolved by simply having the intervention on one or two players within the Black community, even outside the Black community. That our challenges are really systemic. They will transcend us as human beings. They will stay there because they are wicked in nature. And they require not only important investments, some of which have been announced in this budget, but also would require us to start thinking about how do we work differently among ourselves. So when I was reflecting in several meetings this week with the folks responsible for the budget and others in the community, what came time and again for me as a member of the community is, what's my call of leadership around this? And I think it's very, very important for us to recognize, yes, the investments are historic in this budget. They are transformational in terms of their aspiration. But concurrently, I think the important question to ask for us is, collectively, what's our leadership to make sure that we move from a budget announcement to actually delivering the goods for Black communities? And that's some of the things that I really wanted to bring in our discussion. Why is this historic? Historic is it's unprecedented as far as I'm concerned. There is $101 billion new spending in this budget in the next 3 years. Well, it's historic because not only from the Black lens, but it's historic also when you look at it from an Indigenous lens. There is in this budget the first ever large investment in terms of Indigenous funding, $18 billion. When you look at that over the next 5 years, yeah, it's historic also because it's transitioning us to a green economy. I want us to really pause and think about that. What does that actually mean for Black folks? There is about 17.8 in that range in billions to move us to the so-called green economy. There are segments in our community that have been advocating for the longest about racial justice and climate justice. And what does that actually mean in terms of really seeing the work that we're doing from that lens? What's our call of leadership around that? Yes, there are dedicated, unprecedented dollars for Black communities. For example, we have, for the first time, a $200 million philanthropic endowment fund, which came because many have worked so hard. Some of them in this call, but out there in the community. What does that mean to have a $200 million philanthropic foundation for the first time, Black-led? That's going to really actually respond to some of the needs that we have in our community. Some of you have been following the UN Decade of People of African Descent. I see my sister Sarah mentioning that. You know that there have been in the 2019 budget, $25 million under the UN Decade of People of African Descent. It took about 3 years to really access that fund. So one of the things that we wanted to talk today is timeliness and access to the funds. There are some certain investments that will need additional public advocacy work for us to actually mobilize them quickly so that they reach our communities. There are certain investments that are in periods of 3 years and more. But if you look at the $100 million that is in the budget, for example, we do have at the moment the $25 million that I mentioned under the Supporting Black Canadian Communities Initiative. Yeah, that is now quadrupled to a tune of $100 million. And mind you, it has to be spent within this fiscal year, 2021-22. When you think about that, on average, it takes a federal department to about 7 to 8 months to roll out a grant program. Think about spending $100 million in 12 months. What is the role that Black leaders across the country have to think about helping senior bureaucrats in Ottawa to actually customize grant programs to make these investments quickly accessible to our communities? If the experience of the last 3 years is something for all of us to contemplate, is that we need to work together. We cannot afford to really fight to get the piece of the pie. We have to put Black communities at the forefront. We have to find, collaboration as a way forward to really work as partners in solution with governments. Yeah. So there are here in this budgets, I think, and some of my colleagues will speak to that, some really unprecedented investments. My sister Paulette probably will talk in a greater detail around the amazing investments around gender-based violence and really supporting women and girls. You have heard about the word she recession, yeah? And I strongly believe that Black community cannot recover properly if we cannot get our girls and women at the forefront of the recovery. Strongly believe in that. But also, there is massive investments to the tune of $5.7, $5.6 billion in the whole area of skilled trades and youth and workforce development. So while there are segments in the budget that are exclusively segmented and dedicated for Black communities, we could be readily accessible if we work closely to make sure that they are designed well to respond to our needs. There are universal budget lines that you can see, like the housing file, for example. There's $2.5 billion. In addition, for those of you who have followed this file, there's already $70 billion over 10 years that has been announced on this file. 2 weeks ago, we hosted a national roundtable with Minister Hussein to talk about the challenges of why Black communities are not really participating in the housing file. We hosted a roundtable with him and the president and CEO of Canada Mortgage Housing Corporation. So we need to think about how do we enable the capacity of Black community leaders and organizations to actually create pathways to access these investments. And to do that, I think it's very, very important to really step back and say, let's not get lost in the trees here. We have to see the forest, which is the Black community. We have to see the data. And the data is not trending well for us, has not been trending well for us for the longest. So we need to put our egos at bay and start moving to ecosystem approaches of working together collaboratively so that we can sit at the policy table with ministers of the crown, with senior bureaucrats that are going to really mobilize and move this budget into action to be able to say, we need to craft this in such a way that's accountable and responsive to the needs of Black communities. I am very, very hopeful and optimistic about what we have seen this week in terms of the federal budget. And I pose and I say, a lot of you in this call and outside in the community across Canada really advocated in your own ways, but you came collaboratively from time to time to really raise the bar for governments to be accountable to the Black communities. What I can tell you after 25, 27 years of working in the sector is that we cannot do it alone. I strongly believe, starting from myself, that we need to put our egos at bay and try to really push a Black ecosystem approach so that we can work together to make sure that the federal, provincial, and city and municipal governments, Philanthropy Canada, work with us as partners in solution. And to do that, we need a paradigm shift. We must, and I will close this by saying, we have to transform the existing relationship that we have with governments from one of transaction, where they fund us to do things and we come back with compliance reports to them, to one seeing them as partner in solutions, sitting at the table and saying, let's first understand the scope of challenge of Black communities. Let's then create a shared understanding of the solutions that we must scale. And to do that, we need private sector leaders at the table. We need phase leaders at the table, young leaders, women, community sector leaders. We need Philanthropy Canada there. We need to craft an architecture of engagement, brothers and sisters, to work differently so that we recognize that the work that we're doing today and in the coming 2-3 years is actually laying the foundation for the next 20, 30 years. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. And yes, the budget is historic. The challenge for all of us is now, how do we work collectively with government to make it real for our communities?
Thank you, Manuel. Appreciate it. Paulette, I'd love to get your thoughts and perspective on the budget itself, where you believe it affects the vertical that you represent, and obviously how it intersects with the effect on the Black community. I'd love to get your thoughts on that as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And thank you, Emmanuel. Always love listening to you. And thank you for that overview. I want to add to the overview of the budget in terms of an unprecedented investment in national childcare, which is $30 billion. Never done before, promised many times, but it's the first time we've gotten it to this level. So that is incredible. And that's also over a number of years, and will help to move us towards $10 per day childcare. And if anyone of you have children have had to pay for childcare, you know what a significant difference that will make to families in Canada, and particularly to women who carry the lion's share of looking after their families and after their children. So my lens in terms of the work I do has been gender, but never without race. So I want to make that very clear. It's always an intersectional lens. And even though I head up a mainstream women's organization, and there's a lot to tell about heading up a mainstream women's organization that we could probably get into later. But the leadership that I provide must be one that focuses on addressing those who have been most impacted, particularly during this pandemic, but were already behind the 8th ball prior to the pandemic. So Emmanuel mentioned the She Session. I think the She Session has also happened in terms of a Black session. And so it's the deadly combination of these two things that have rendered our community in a state of being underrepresented in terms of the support to businesses, in terms of the impact on whether or not they are able to maintain their jobs. We know that women, in particular women who have been on the front lines that we have been calling heroes because they are doing essential work, have been the either risking their lives or have lost their jobs entirely. So they've been risking their lives if they're in healthcare, if they're in the service industry in some areas, or they have just lost their jobs. But it's also important to say, particularly when you think of the number of folks within the Black community, and women in particular, who are doing PSW work, personal support workers, that these workers are paid so little that we have known of stories of PSWs who are living in shelter, in homeless shelter, because they don't make enough to be able to pay rent. So we have a problem on our hands. that we must address. And I completely agree with Emmanuel that we must sit at multiple tables. We have to put aside sometimes our own mission and get together, because if we want to actually move from that transactional way of working that we've been used to, that has rendered us into competition against each other, to one that's about moving collaboratively for the betterment of our community now, but for generations to come, then it is necessary that we work together. So that this is happening in the women's community as well, and the leadership in the women's community has also transformed. So it's a kind of leadership where I take it upon myself personally that any kind of table or stage or panel such as this, if it is not inclusive of a Black woman's voice within the women's community, it must not go ahead. If it's not inclusive of Indigenous women's voice, what is the point, right? So we want to make sure that when we are speaking about women, girls, and gender diverse folks, that we mean it in the sense of no one left behind. And it is that kind of approach that I think will be critical. So in every aspect of this budget, with over 600 million to address gender-based violence, one of the things we don't know well in Canada, despite the fact that the gender-based violence sector has been doing this work for 4 decades in terms of shelters and that kind of network of providing escape from violence to women in Canada, what we don't know is what is the experience of Black women at the intersection of violence. We don't know that. And so I'm very, very pleased that with some focused advocacy, some pointed advocacy with Minister Monsef, 3 of us leaders, myself, Naneka, who is the ED, Naneka McGregor, who's the Executive Director at Women at the Center, and also here in Toronto, as well as Angela McDougall, who's the ED of Battered Women Support Services in Vancouver. We got together, we brought this issue to the minister and said, what is the point of having a national action plan that does not center Black women, that does not center Indigenous women? So we were able to get funding for 5 years to actually do research into what that is, because Black women's voices have been silenced and we actually suffer in silence. And so we don't know what our stories are, we don't know what experiences are. And I can bet you that part of that experience is also the treatment that they get when they show up at shelters or any kind of GBV services. So I'm excited about what's possible. What I'm seeing on the ground is a different way of working, right? Where people know that it is that collaborative approach that's actually going to make the key difference to how we are able to recover from this pandemic. And instead of going back to normal, and we know what normal was about exclusion, normal was about poverty, normal was about racism and anti-Black racism, right? So I'm not about wanting to go back to normal. I think the time has come for us to reset normal, create a new normal where everyone actually can benefit from the supports from this budget, but also from recreating a better society for everybody to matter. So I look forward to that.
Thank you, Paulette. Trevor, this budget obviously has a lot of what we would call historic. One of those historic pieces is childcare and all the things that surrounds that. A vertical that you know well and obviously are one of our leaders. I'd love to get your perspective on obviously the budget as we're speaking, but also the vertical itself of where you live and breathe.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everyone. I think overall, for our sector, which is the early learning and childcare sector, it's a welcomed budget. As Paulette mentioned, it's a long time coming. We've had near misses of getting a national framework, but never to fruition. So the fact that the federal government is showing a commitment in the budget now toward moving toward a system of early learning and childcare and putting dollars attached is a good sign. Are we there yet? Is there more work to do? Definitely, because the dollars will not flow until negotiations happen with each province and territory. And that is a big stage and phase that has to happen. I think Emmanuel mentioned the mobilization and advocacy. In the early learning and childcare space, that advocacy is vital and paramount. And it has been happening over decades, specifically over the last year and a half, trying to move the discussion and conversation about early learning and childcare as an essential service, specifically during the COVID crisis. Childcare has always been an essential service, but what this budget does and says is it gives it a recognition that it is an essential service, and it is an essential impact toward the economy, toward families, toward women, and toward families marginalized and Black families specifically. We all know the data of children, Black children in the youth justice system, in the education system, in the child welfare system. We're talking about children who are going through a child care and school system that are not being prepared for entry. So when we look at child care 0 to 4 and Black children 0 to 4, and we map that onto the existing child care fees, unaffordable fees where families will have to pay upwards of $1,800 a month, we can see that in some sectors of society and of our cities, Black families cannot enter the market when costs are that level. So what does that mean for Black children? Well, it means that parents are making choices. If they can't pay $1,800 a month for childcare, then their choice is to stay home, pulls the Black parent out of the workforce, and then affects that child's child development and learning. So what happens when Black parents do pay that? They find the money to pay that extremely high cost monthly, and now there's choices between payment for food, healthy food choices, payment for rent. And when we look at the data that shows a lot of the Black children are not in the licensed sector because of the unaffordability. The unlicensed sector comes with very low or no oversight. The safety and risks go up. And then we're talking about a lack of early learning system where the child's learning and child development is taken into account when those kids are in service. So school readiness is not being met for many of the Black children. So what's good about this budget in terms of early learning and childcare is that early learning and childcare is the focus. We're not talking about daycare, we're talking about a system that wraps around the child and gets them ready for school entry, teaches and encourages and provides a caring adult, responsive staffing, high quality services, and focuses on building relationships. So it's the school readiness that Black kids need, so when they enter into kindergarten and school, they're better set up for success, and we could change some of those that data. So this budget is focusing on a system of early learning childcare, which is really good. Check mark 1. It's putting committed dollars into early learning and childcare, historic amounts of dollars, so $30 billion over 5 years. With a commitment to make that ongoing and permanent. In addition, there are additional dollars that is going to focus on the workforce. So any talk of a national childcare system, early learning and childcare system, cannot be had without talking about the early the ECE workforce. when we look at the workforce, 80 to 90% of the workforce is women, high level of racialized women. The wage levels are low. The retention and recruitment is a problem. We have a supply issue. So 420 million has been committed to as a part of the economic statement in this budget for the workforce. So those are good pieces, but again, these still have to be negotiated with the bilateral agreements with the provinces. So a lot of advocacy at the provincial level needs to happen to bring these things to fruition.
Thank you, Trevor. Sarah, would love to get your take as well and perspective on the budget itself, but also with the many areas that you are advocating for, where does it hit and how does it affect it? So please take the stage.
Thank you, Michael. The biggest thing I would say for the budget, if it comes to our Black community, it really doesn't hit. It doesn't represent anything. You can go through all the areas from healthcare, from the childcare component, because especially majority of us Black descendant, African descendant live in the GTA surrounding area. And if anybody knows, childcare spaces is unavailable. So it doesn't talk about that. But what I'm interested in is specific with the government saying 300 million to support Black and other underrepresented entrepreneurs. So that means, again, it's not only us as African descendant. This is what I want the Black community to understand. This support of 300 million includes, and the wordings that they keep using, it's Black, it's other, is marginalized. That means when it comes to us Black or African descendant, we will be sharing the pot or competing once again for funding with other entities, with other organizations, because again, it's what they're proposing. So if we're talking about when it comes to the international decade, this is why we're kind of missing the point when it comes to us as a Black community, because the decade outlines in detail. It's a 10-year that was talked about. 3 years ago is when the government acknowledged it, but they didn't go through the recommendation. It actually outlines the development component, which is the social economic when it comes to the African descendant. And let me tell you, when it comes to this federal 2021 budget, we're not on it. And Emmanuel kind of showcased a little bit of detail is because we're not together. We're not coming in as a one voice. We're all working in silos. We have been creating different tables of mechanism in place, different organization, you could hear it, but everybody doing that because we're fighting for that little crumbs, as I call it, with the government, instead of coming together, looking into the international decade that outlines everything from the when it comes to healthcare, unemployment. It states what the federal government should be doing to combating this institutionalized racism. But nobody's talking about it because we're not together through it. And the game that they plays is the tokenism that they keep doing. And this little 300 million here that they're saying that you still have to apply for it. It's still kind of like a funding and a proposal. So are we gonna connecting all the dots together, coming together and calling out? And the biggest component is, as am I hearing, is advocacy. Guess what? The Black community are struggling on the ground. They do not have the energy nor the time to go out there and advocate for their employment because information are not trickling down. Information are not shared to the grassroots levels, to the residents, to the Black community of what they need to do so that before this budget comes in or before any election happens, that they can advocate not only for themselves, but for their children. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate that. Richard, give me your, obviously your perspective as well. And for you holding the crime and youth vertical, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are in terms of where the budget hits and how it may or may not affect the vertical that you are championing.
Thank you. Just to start off, I mean, Sarah brought up some very good points. And one of the things for us right now in this climate is the fact that this budget that came out, my question is this money going to be able to reach the grassroots organization and community that's doing the work? Because we've seen it over and over again where these funds have been coming out, but they've been trickling down to the big organizations. And at the end of the day, the organizations, the grassroots that's doing the work in the community, we're not getting the money. it's a perfect example where we at Keep Six, we developed a program, the gun situation, and we needed $3,000, I think it was, to do our pilot. That money is money that we as an organization, I had to go and find to get that money to do that work that needs to be done. This is a program itself within our community that's needed because we've had a significant amount of gun violence that's been happening. And we've been able to get the support and so forth that's needed. But the question again comes back to the budget. Where is this money is going to go? We've heard many times that we've gotten this $200 or $300 or $400 million for the Black community to do this work, but we have not seen it. You know, we are the individuals in the organization that's out here that's doing, as they would say, in the trenches, doing the work. We're not getting any of that funding. We're not seeing that funding, and that's my main objective to this budget right now. And I would like to get some answers at the end of the day for the support for the organization that's in here doing the work today.
Thank you, Richard. Daniella, I'd like to get your perspective. One of the things that you had mentioned in your background was the work that you guys continued to do and did to get organizations ready, the readiness and preparation that they could be so that they could take advantage of situations like this. Where does the budget, in your perspective, how does the budget affect that vertical of organizations and the vertical that you represent?
Right. Thanks, Michael. So, my overall thoughts when it comes to the budget is that, it's long overdue and it's much needed. The investment that we're seeing in the Black community is very much needed. We can no longer, have major gaps in our community that don't see funding. So when it comes to investment readiness, we know that the organizations are out there doing the great work, but, there are still gaps. And to the point earlier, we have this 1 year where funds are going to be allocated, but we do need to work in collaboration. We do need to work in partnership to ensure that those funds are able to benefit the beneficiaries. And, I think too, we also need to continue to figure out ways to challenge government to deliver this type of financial investment and support with a greater sense of speed and urgency. And we need to partner with government and ensure that the right people are a part of the delivery system. So for me, when I look at, who really needs to benefit, Black women and girls and youth, and we heard Paulette speak to this, but I think that's very, very important. And, bringing it back to the grassroots organization and Richard's point, there are organizations and grassroots groups across the country who have done the work and are doing the work, but yet they continue to fight for funding or overlooked by intermediaries constantly. And so we need to ensure that, this doesn't continue. We need to ensure that these groups are able to get that funding. And this is going to be very, very important given the timeline that we have to get the money from government and get it out to our communities. So I think in terms of being investment ready, it's really, working in partnership and delivering that message strongly to government.
Thanks, Daniella. Craig, give me your perspective as well. You are heading, obviously, an organization that is centered on long-term financial aid, partnerships through the Black community and representation, entrepreneurism. Where does this budget hit in your vertical, and what are your viewpoint as you look at it and if you hear everything that's been surrounding it so far?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I mean, the focus of our organization, while it is about developing this significant pool of sustainable funds, it's more the why. It's not just about the funds, but it's what that for. So it's for the community. And since our focus is here, education, it's healthcare, it's youth, it's criminal justice, it's arts and culture. So there's many tranches of funds in this this budget that speak to those. So it's not just the obvious pieces is around the endowment fund, and as Amanuel has said, BOF and a number of other organizations worked very tirelessly and sometimes thankfully collaboratively, to advocate to government for this important step. So it is an important step, and it is a historic step, but is it transformational? So and that's why we have to be careful when we look at certain pockets of this budget. You can certainly say they're transformational. I see, something like the $30 billion in terms of childcare. That is going to be transformational, because in terms of, 48% of Black youth 14 and under are in single parent households, and the majority of that is women led. Having within a year, the goal of dropping the childcare cost by 50%, and then getting to a $10 a day childcare is going to be transformational in terms of addressing, the gender labor gap, which is significant, moving people out of temporary work, women especially out of temporary positions, and into the labor force. I mean, in Quebec, where this has been in place since the 1990s, we see the impacts on the economy. Their economy, in terms of participation in the labor force, and the economic impact of that is significant, and it's significantly higher than all across Canada. So we have the stats and the data. But if we look, across the budget, we have to go, because we have to understand intersectionality. There's 122 places in the budget where Black community is mentioned. It's 122 times. But in many of those areas, as Sarah mentioned, it's Black and racialized and other. So we know there's a significant amount of money that is specifically a pool set aside for the Black community. But we have to look at how do we ensure that the other places where it is potentially grouped with racialized, and we've seen it before, where it becomes a pocket and it's a pool, and the Black community is mentioned, but over the course of time, the Black community becomes very marginalized when those funds are actually distributed. So I think it is important what this budget has done, because we're moving from just Band-Aids and dealing with symptoms. This budget makes us move a little bit further into addressing root causes, because the systemic barriers that Black community has faced has left an opportunity chasm, and you cannot cross a chasm with small incremental steps. You got to leap, right? And that's what we were looking for from this budget. It has to be transformational. If it is not transformational all the way across the board, then what we're doing is we're just kicking the problem down the road. So the Black Caucus, Greg Ferguson, Minister Hussein, and many other have fought really hard, and in many times have put their neck out, because we've never seen anything to this level. So we do need to acknowledge that in terms of what we've seen is unprecedented, but we still need more. I mean, brothers and sisters of mine in the Indigenous community have looked at the $30 billion investment. And many of my brothers and sisters who work in Indigenous communities said this is a great start. And that is the approach that we need to take. This is a great first step. And we need to continue to advocate. We need to look at all across in the different pillars and say, how do we find some of that money and turn that money Black? How do we get that? And how do we increase the areas and ensure that the spending, how it is done, how it is adjudicated, the processes are done with a Black lens? And look at how do we get more of that money and make sure it's injected into our community. But there's certainly a number of places where it is going to be transformational. Again, the housing, that potentially significantly transformational. The procurement, the investment in procurement by the federal government but it has a significant opportunity, and we need to make sure we keep up the advocacy to keep pushing forward and make sure it's done. And it has to be done collaboratively. We can't be fighting organizations fighting each other over scraps. We need to together, and that, you know, the joint letter, as brother Ryan Knight made a comment about it. The joint letter that they received with 226 Black-led and Black serving organizations from across Canada talking about that need, and it was, you know, presented by NAPSI on behalf of these community organizations. It sends a message, and that didn't just send a message to the government. It sends a message to our community about what we can do together, because that's never happened before. And that's a start, and we need to be committed to keep that up.
Thanks, Craig. Obviously, as we know, or some will say, this is a budget that does not meet the equator. It doesn't meet the standard. It doesn't meet the standard of what we were expecting, what we were hoping for, what we fought for, what should be delivered on the table. There are others who obviously will say this is a terrific start. It's a building block that we can build upon. I'd love to get obviously your viewpoint on that. What is great about this? What is the concern that you have? What does this budget do well? And what obviously are the glaring omissions, or what is missing from it? And I'll start with you, Emmanuel.
I think I tended to see things from an asset-based perspective. So for me, the glass is half full. Because I have been in the trenches with many of the Black leaders in the last year and a half, in the advocacy and mobilization, government relations, funder relations, I've kind of seen things from the inside. And I think from where we are now, I do believe actually we have made some good progress. The fact that we have a $200 million philanthropic foundation fund didn't happen just like that. A lot of leaders in the community actually advocated for that. In fact, we have a group of Black young leaders that have created the first philanthropic foundation, the Foundation of Black Communities, which has worked with us in Carleton University to do a research that showed out of $100 that Philanthropy Canada invests in Canada, only 30 cents are invested in Black communities. The budget made reference to this, recognized that there is inequity in terms of investments, that they have to do something there. And I'm very pleased that they have made a move there. The UN Decade of People of African Descent, a lot of groups have advocated for this. My organization was just one of those many. The UNDP Coalition, the Meeting of the Minds, many groups across Canada, African Nova Scotians, and a lot of groups from out west. Yes, we had frustrations around rolling out quickly and accessing the $25 million. But for those of you who are not aware, for the first time, we have Black intermediaries. Last year, the federal government went and parked money with big mainstream intermediaries in the Emergency Community Support Fund. But they have worked with the community, albeit late, to create the first Black intermediaries. We have 3 of them. They are in the process of adding a 4th one from Western Canada. In June, we are launching the first Black Canadian Intermediaries National Network to push this agenda that the federal government needs to directly invest in Black communities through Black organizations. So I think there is some progress there in terms of some of the work that has been done. There is no question that we need more. I mean, when the federal finance minister introduced the budget, she spoke about the budget trying to tackle 3 challenges: fighting COVID, job recovery, and the most important challenge that she mentioned that's quite relevant for us is building a resilient Canada. So when we talk about, for a moment, forget governments and others to talk, what is the Black Canadian recovery and resilience agenda at the moment? We don't have one. We don't have one that's coherent. We have never had discussions among ourselves to say, hey, this is how we should recover post-pandemic. I think the comments made by my sister Paulette around resetting the normal and having a new normal. Let's have a conversation. What's the new normal for Black communities? And I think for me, the reason that I said that this budget has actually made historic commitments. Monday, we're releasing a detailed analysis from a Black lens what this budget means for Black communities. And when you go through each budget line, there are universal commitments where we can't tap. For example, I already mentioned the housing fire. There are challenges there. We're openly saying, the way that Canada Mortgage Housing Corporation is structured at the moment, there's no Black strategy there. There's no Black strategy. We need to build that. When we talk about mental health, when we talk about employment, skills development, we need to build capacity in the Black community to engage, to be a partner in solutions for government. And I am optimistic because now we have, for the first time, a foundation of Black communities led by Black young leaders. We have interest from private sector, Black folks through the organization that Greg is leading. We have, young leaders that are pushing us, like Sarah. We have people that are willing to run for office. There are a lot of players within this Black ecosystem that we have to mobilize. What we are lacking at the moment is an architecture of engagement. We have not been able so far to bring all of us around the round table to be able to say what matters for the Black community. And that's where I'm pushing again and again this paradigm shift, where it's not about us, it's actually about the Black communities, and we need to come together in working collaboratively.
Thanks, Emmanuel. Paulette would like to get your view on the same question.
Well, I have so many thoughts, it's hard to know where to begin. But, similar to Emmanuel, I've been very close to the flame on this one, this particular budget at the Canadian Women's Foundation, but in quite a few of the collaborative bodies that have been working, whether the charitable sector itself, the Black community, the women's community. I've been in all of these camps, so to speak, and we have actually come forward with a very unified voice, right? So I think this budget is historic because of the recognition that it finally has given to particular issues in our community. The investments are not where we want them to be. But let's really be clear about this one. As someone who's been following budgets for a long time, and I'm talking federal budgets, I have never seen anything like this. So I think that that's an important thing to realize. So now I think the opportunity now is how do we work this particular budget for our community, in favor of our community? I think that is the question that's on the table. And it's on the table not just for our community. It's on the table for the wider charitable sector in the nonprofit space. It's on the table for the women's community. There will be, someone earlier said in opening comments, I think it was Trevor, talked about this being the devil is in the details. It absolutely is. But guess what? The framework's been created. So now how do we make sure that we are collaborating, that we're working together to create that vision for our Black community? In the women's community, we're doing that, right? We're ahead of the game. But in the Black community, I haven't seen that, even though we have had some learnings, I would say, over the past year about the importance of collaborating and not going forward on your own, right? That is important. But now what is the next step, right? So there are some, first of all, I am so moved by the incredible brilliance within the Black community. Like, there is no lack of it. And because there's no lack of it, I think, how do we now actually utilize that brilliance in the way that is that collectively responds to the needs in our community? And I want to then say leadership matters, right? Leadership matters. And in our community, we need to build our leadership capacity with particular principles and values that ensures that when these monies come our way, that we are guided by them, right? We can't afford to have negative results that doesn't actually reflect the brilliance in our community. We can't afford that now, right? So what is the best way forward? It's being able to capture the collective brilliance of who we are, the vision that we have for our community in all the aspects that we've already mentioned, and ensure that where we are lacking, we're building that capacity. So for example, last year when the government rolled out the emergency funds in response to COVID, what really troubled my heart was that we were dependent on mainstream organizations in order to get money to our community. This government's taking a different approach. And I can tell you, Minister Hassan is doing what no other minister has ever done, right? This is not a political statement, it's a reality, right? So he's doing what no other minister has ever done. He's one of the hardest working ones on the Hill, right? So no, we didn't get the kinds of billions that we wanted, but neither did other sectors, right? Other sectors didn't either. The charitable sector asked for, I think, 2 billion, Emmanuel, I'm trying to remember. We got 400 million, right, for the recovery. Same with, we asked for $1 billion in terms of women and gender equality, right? We got 600 million. So let's be clear, nobody got everything they wanted. What are we going to do with what we got? And how we're going to build forward to ensure that we can keep building that forward. So that, I think that would be my response, is that Emmanuel talked about for the first time, the government has recognized that we too can be intermediaries. They don't always have to go to the usual suspects. So how do we make sure that we're building that capacity? As the Canadian Women's Foundation, we are an intermediary for the women's sector, right? I think it would be counterproductive to go to a mainstream organization to be an intermediary for the Black community, right? So let's keep building this capacity within us so that we can actually direct the funds where they're needed, so that organizations like Keep Six and others will be able to not have to jump through as many hoops to even be seen or heard and recognized in order to access those funds.
Thank you, Paulette. Trevor, I will ask you the same, and also what it is that you think works, what is great about this, and what obviously is a blind spot.
Well, I like the comments so far. I think again, we're acknowledging the historic step of the budget. I would reiterate, Minister Hassan is one of the hardest working people in government, and that's been said a lot because it's true. And his office has been reaching out significantly for collaboration, engagement, and feedback, and post-budget discussions. So I think what we have to do as a Black community is find all of those inserts of opportunities to engage. And then I agree with the comments in terms of finding ways to become independent. I think it was Ryan who sent a message about not being dependent and being a crutch. Well, we have to build up the infrastructure in the Black community so that when funding comes down, we then can move into a determination of where and how it gets rolled out. And I think that's happening, as Emmanuel said. So I think clearly we're not there yet, but there are significant steps that have taken place over the last year and a half. And someone mentioned urgency. I think one of the main things we need to be putting our hand up and saying is, over the last year and a half, the virus, COVID, has disproportionately targeted our community, right? And that's a significant sense of emergency that we have to make sure that we are not just letting go by. So recovery for the Black women, our Black children and families in those hotspots, making sure that there is funding in order to keep our families and culture safe and getting back to work. So, in looking through the budget, I think we need to be looking for all of the areas that we can, get and use funding to build that independence so that we can do and implement a recovery for COVID, then get back to the issues that were there before COVID. Because this is a window of commitment and funding opportunity. And I agree in terms of building an independence of infrastructure so that we can build in that sustainability for our families, right? Because the thing is with government, you never know when those pots are going to come again, right? The other thing is we need to understand the process and flow of the money. As far as I understand, at least for the sectors that I'm in, the money has to go through the bilateral negotiations. Provinces need to sign on and agree to the terms and the accountabilities that are coming with the dollars. That's not a given, right? So there's a piece of mobilization and advocacy that must happen, and that's within the next 6 months, right? To make sure that provincially we actually have that opportunity to use the money. So I think there's priorities in terms of mobilization that has to happen in the short term, and then there's longer term plans once money is confirmed flowing down.
Thanks, Trevor. Sarah, I'd like to get your view on the same question.
Thank you. I think I'm going to call on a few things about here. I'm hearing a lot of historic and wins about this. Historic would be actually the government of Canada acknowledging and apologizing for the slavery in Canada that took place. That's historic. This 2021 budget, again, it's federal. It will trickle down to all the provinces and territory. Richard mentioned also earlier, how is this budget going to be trickling down to the Black community, to the individual pockets? There's nothing of win about this budget. And for us as a Black community to be content with basic, that this is how we're supposed to be happy, that we're receiving crumbs, says a lot. And this says, again, with the capacity building, if it calls about leadership, is to call ourselves as leaders who are calling ourselves, are we here representing truly the Black community, or we have other agendas? That's the number one thing. Is it the government entity component? This government or previous government, it doesn't matter. When it comes to the Black community, post-COVID and right now in COVID, they are the ones that are being suffering. We are in an SOS emergency, specifically when it comes to the Black woman with the children, especially with the virtual learning going on, the fact that they've lost the jobs and it's affecting the Black community. And how is this budget going to be trickling down to the Black community? How exactly is it? Most of this budget has been called on. We gotta be authentic and honest. We gotta speak to the Black community, and this is what they want to hear, the truth. What exactly as leaders are we doing? And if we're gonna be advocating on behalf of the Black community, are we truly advocating to the truth to call that out? Because if we're not, and how we're coming together is, as we said it, through the decade. This government, again, may have acknowledged the decade, but they are not utilizing. And it has to be called, including reparation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Appreciate that. Richard, I'd like to get your thoughts and feelings. Same question.
Thanks. At this point in time, I really feel that this budget itself is not what we really need. I think there's a lot missing, and we could definitely use more. But at the same time, I will say that this is the time with what is taking place is that we need to come together as one and work together in a collective to make this work and be able to make the changes. We have to keep in mind that changes is something that's going to take a time. But if we're able to unite and be a voice, then there's definitely an opportunity for us to see the significant steps that we need to move forward. I listened to Paulette, and she made a very good statement that we need to unite with a voice and be one, and that's very, very important, because unity is something that we need at this point. And I think over a period of time in the past, the government itself is taking notes to the voices of these young people in our community now. We are going through a pandemic that has been taking place. We notice we have offenders that's being released in the community have no food. They have no jobs. We can't say we're about supporting these individuals, or reintegration as they would call it, but there's no reintegration happening. It's great to use the word reintegration, but then we need to stop and look at what are they doing when it comes to reintegration. We have the federal government having offenders working and making $34 every 2 weeks in their system, making millions of dollars. But then that same offender is released, and there's no support for these offenders once they come out. We have agencies out here that's doing the work to support these offenders, but there's no funding. So at the same token, we have to come together as one and be a voice and do what we can as a team to make that change happen and to make them realize that this is what's needed. We have to be that voice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Richard. Daniella?
Thanks, Michael. As I listen to the dialogue that's happening here, I think, let's certainly be honest. This budget is not what we expected, and it's not what we wanted. But we have to build on what we have. When we look at the past year, we all know that our community has been hit extremely hard as a result of COVID-19. And that's in addition to the systemic barriers that the Black community was already facing before the pandemic hit. So these investments that we are seeing in the budget are absolutely necessary. And so, what's good is that we have $200 million in new funding that we didn't have before to fight anti-Black racism and to improve social and economic outcomes in the Black communities. And we have $100 million that's being allocated to capacity building for Black-led and nonprofit organizations. So when we think about what's good, I'm pleased to see that there are specific areas within the budget that speak to the needs of our community. So we've heard it, from others on the panel, but mental health, Black mental health during COVID is so important. Something that we really need to address and think forward as we look to recovery. How are we going to ensure the overall health and well-being of our Black community members? Black entrepreneurship. Again, we spoke about how Black women are affected, how small businesses have been affected. And then there's, procurement opportunities that are available. And of course, addressing systemic racism. So, there's that. And then when it comes to the $100 million that's allocated to capacity building for Black-led organizations, we already know we have organizations doing great work. We have tremendous reach. We have connections within the community. And so, from my lens, coming from the social impact sector, with the investments such as these, what it creates is an opportunity for Black-led organizations to actually be able to explore opportunities for revenue diversification and generation that will allow for much needed improvements when it comes to fiscal sustainability and long-term impact. So these are the things that I'm thinking about as we're going through this discussion. When it comes to my concern, again, $351 million directly to the Black community is great, but is it everything we wanted? Is it everything we need? No, it's a start, and we just need to acknowledge, or I want to acknowledge that The budget, might not have everything, but it really is a great start. I think we can build on it, and this is what we need to do, and this is what we need to focus our energy on. We need to take this and we need to build up, and then still challenge the government to deliver on this faster, so we ensure that we have these funds and we can get these funds to our community. I think of the advocacy and the leadership of the community, of my fellow panelists, to get us to this point. I think of those in government. I've already heard the acknowledgement of Greg Fergus, Minister Hussein, Marcy Ian, members of the Black Caucus, Minister Freeland, and others. And it obviously took many, many individuals to make this happen. What we were seeing now, it took many people to get us there. But given that, I think, can you imagine when we have more representation, we have more Black individuals around the table, imagine what we can achieve and what we'll be able to do for our community. So maybe it's a more optimistic view, but that's where I'm coming from at this point. And I think, what's really key as we go forward is that, we can't continue to fund the same organizations. We need to spread our lens wider. We need to be able to identify other organizations, especially those who already have the trust of the community, that can also be trusted advisors and trusted dispensers of the funds. The glass is maybe half full. The money, that we have for Black communities is good, but some of the real opportunity, I think, also exists in other places as well. For example, housing, better data, other areas as well. So I'll leave it out there, but looking at it as a glass half full.
Thanks, Daniella. Craig, same question to you, sir.
Yeah, at the end of the day, as I said, I characterize it as a start, as a first step, but it's an important first step, right? If I'm hungry and I want a big plate of food, and I don't get the big plate of food, but I get a sandwich, I'm going to eat the sandwich because that's going to give me some energy to go fight, to demand the meal I wanted. And it's going to give me energy so I can cook my own food, right? And that's the plan. So we have what we have. We're still going to fight, and we need to advocate for more. And we got to be strategic too, because the way to show that you want more is you take the money that you have and you ensure that the structures are in place, that it gets to our community, that it has impact, and then we measure it and we report back, and we give. We've given a shout out to the Black Caucus, to Minister Hussein and so on. We need to give them cover and we need to give them support, because as much as we're out here fighting, imagine them. We're in here fighting, and we're all Black faces and all of that, and we have that. Imagine being the only Black federal minister in government fighting for Black causes. We need to give them the support. We need to give them the data. We need to, that letter again with 226 Black community organizations saying this is what we want and we're demanding from the government, gives them the ability to go to government and say, see, there is widespread support for this, that the community is united on this. So we have to do that. And we have to, as Daniella said, we got to make sure that we got more inside. Because if Minister Hussein, one Black federal minister, we're able to get to this, imagine what's going to happen when we get 6 or 7. So we have to start mobilizing politically. We have to get candidates run, and that's for all parties, because this is not a partisan issue. We got to be running in all parties, and we got to make sure that it doesn't matter who wins an election or what have you. We have a voice, we have a seat at the table, and we had a role in selecting the menu, cooking it, all of that, right? So there's strategy that we got to play. Is this the end? Nah. Did we get all we want? No. But we are being heard, and we need to make sure that our voices are amplified. And we need to be energized from this meal that we got, so we can continue fighting and go cook our food and demand the bigger meal.
Thank you, Craig. I appreciate that. Just wanted to say that we were trying and we are attempting to allow maybe 30 minutes at the end for Q&A. We are running a little bit behind because of the quality of the conversation. So I'm just giving everybody a shout out there. obviously we've spoken about what is, what needs to be, how we need to do it, why we need to do it, how do we get it done. So the question really now is, with everything that is on the table and not on the table, how do we go forward? What do we need to do so that we can, one, capitalize on what's here? What do we need to do individually to become a collective that we're obviously are not doing as well as we need to do? And what seems to be the gaps that are preventing us from having that quote unquote one voice that maybe is needed, that still seems to be somewhat, or some would say largely fragmented, some would say slightly fragmented. How do we go forward from here? Emmanuel, I'll start with you. You're on mute, by the way.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I think many points, important points have been said already. Maybe I could offer quickly 4 points for us to consider as we move forward. I think part of this is really going through the technicality of the budget process. Once the budget is approved, going through Treasury Board and going to the departments to be implemented, to really recognize where do we need to do advocacy to actually speed up access and ensure that it's done in the proper way. I think we should stop sweating the small stuff. That's the first point that I'm offering. Without going into a lot of detail, I think there are big battles in front of us, so we should stop sweating the small stuff. We should amplify what's working. I think there's a lot of good stuff working, and I think Paulette spoke about the collective brilliance. We need to harvest that. We need to recognize that we are in an intergenerational moment. Some of us, like in my generation, we need to start thinking, what different roles can we play? We have a lot of really amazing young adult Black leaders across the country that they need to step up and lead and be supported. So amplify what's working. We have to be bold to course correct what's not working. Not by finger pointing. I think we need to be able to do it with care and empathy and with a focus on solutions. Roll out the sleeves and be there with the person to try to move things forward. There are a lot of good willing Black leaders and organizations that are advocating. Some of them are doing it in their own way, in silos, fragmented. We need to engage them and try to look at how we actually move forward in the process. The last point that I would say is we have to be bold to introduce what's critically needed and is missing. For me, I keep going to this point that our challenges in the Black community around housing, employment, poverty reduction, all the isms are generational, are systemic. They require collaborative solutions. No one organization in Toronto, or no one leader in Montreal, or no one Black leader, in the private sector in Bay Street, or no government, bureaucrat is going to solve our problems. We need to actually understand the scope of our challenges and the scope of the solutions, and we need to scale the solutions. Folks, this requires arts and science. It doesn't happen like that. There is a way to actually tackle systemic challenges. And that's why the organization that I'm leading is really openly advocating for a paradigm shift from transactional transformational, to get generational leaders to step back and play a different role so that our young leaders can come, to really tackle governments and foundations and funders to move away at throwing money at us, to stay in the table and understand our data and problems and work together with us to devise, the type of interventions and solutions that needed. I was there 15 years ago when the Youth Challenge Fund was created overnight. I just finished it in my role at NAPSI with the Ontario Black Youth Action Plan, another $47 million. We're in Ontario, we're going to launch another $60 million through the Enhanced Youth Action Plan. Federally, there's money. Foundations are interested in investing in Black community. What we don't have at the moment is the Black community working together through an architecture that I call engagement that allows us to move forward. So let's focus on doing our homework among ourselves so that we can better engage governments in our solutions that we need. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel. Paulette, I will go to you with the same.
Thank you. I'm always happy to go right after Emmanuel because I could build on what he says because I'm such a big admirer of his. I love this conversation, and I think this conversation could be replicated by many people in our community. I love the idea of telling us old folks to step back. I'm ready to step back. I consider myself one of those old folks. Craig, don't laugh at me. I'm ready to do that because of what I said earlier. Because our young people, they've got this, and they're unapologetic about what it is that they want. The voice that they bring, I love it. So how do we, as those who are, let's call it more mature, Craig, if you're more comfortable with that, more mature, who can actually provide what they need, not assume what they want, right? So really fill whatever gap it is we need to fill. Because I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm quite happy to step back and play a different kind of role. I also think that there's a piece around accountability, and I have been for decades calling for accountability from our elected officials. These are my tax dollars, right? And it's our tax dollars, and we need to have our tax dollars work for us. We demand that. We've been here before many people who came to this country. We've been here for over 400 years, right? And so, and some of us came here through slavery. Some of us came here through for economic reasons, and others, right? So we have toiled and labored, and this is not us going and begging. This is us demanding what we deserve. So I think we need to reframe that and demand what we deserve. Right? So I think that's an important piece, but accountability is a two-edged sword. So we also have to be accountable when the funds land in our hands, and how are we going to manage them, right? So a good example that we did with other leaders within the women's community is that we developed what we call feminist principles in philanthropy, right? And those principles are important in guiding how we fund, so we're accountable. So if we've been funding for so long, our organization's 30 years, and we haven't been able to fund organizations in Northern Canada, that's a problem. And the problem is not the North, the problem is us, right? So how do we need to alter what we do to be able to make sure that we're meeting that demand, right? So I think that that's important. Around accountability, and there's $172 million in this budget for disaggregated data. Let's take our piece of that money, right? Let's take our piece. You remember the early days, there was lots of resistance around actually being able to point out who was dying from COVID, right? So we can't have that anymore. And so disaggregated data is important, as well as being able to take a look back at what happened to our people, and to make sure as we build forward, we're addressing that in the future, right? So how do we learn from what was done? How do we learn from the impact? In the women's community, we know, because we did the research, that there was a gendered impact because of COVID. And the gendered impact didn't just arrive because of COVID. It was in place before, but because of the systemic issues, they were intensified. It is the same with the Black community, right? So how do we make sure, as I said earlier, that we don't go back to that? And then I also want to introduce humility, right? Which comes with leadership. And the fact is that we don't know everything, and we shouldn't have to know everything, right? There are many folks in our community who have different skills and experience and expertise that we should be able to lean on, right? So how do we make sure we do that? Not all of us are experts in terms of youth development work. Not all of us are experts in terms of gender. Not all of us are experts in terms of poverty. Some of us, like Daniella talked about, the importance of social enterprise and small businesses. And I'm not an expert in that area, but I want to learn, right? So the IRP is an important pot of funds. There's $50 million for that. We are one of the intermediaries with that fund at Canadian Women's Foundation. It is my responsibility and accountability to make sure that I can say to my staff how much of that went to Black women in the community, right? That's an important question. So it doesn't matter if we're leading Black-led. I think the very fact that we're Black, we should always have that lens. We must come with that intersectional lens at all times. And then it's transparency, right? We must be transparent. We must, and transparency is about building trust. We have to trust each other. And that is a piece of work that needs to be done. And perhaps it's a process of building that over time that will get there. I don't think anyone enters the space without good intentions. But good intentions only take you so far. So what is the vision that we're building towards? So I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulette. Trevor, same things. Where do we go from here and how do we get there?
I would just make the point about the Black family. Let's not forget the Black family. Let's go back down, empower them, support them to use their voice. And let's remember what actually moves government, moves systems. It's the voice of the constituents, right? And we really need Black families to get more involved in the systems, in all of these processes. We have Black families working for themselves and for their families and for their culture, and the leaders are doing the same. It's going to be more movement toward that transformation that we all want. So my point is just to not forget the Black families. We need to empower them and support them to use the voice, help to move the system as taxpaying constituents. So I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. Sarah?
I think my sister Paulette said what I needed to say the most. Probably most of you guys know by now where I'm going to go with it. Accountability and transparency. And again, passing the baton to the next generation. This is crucial for us, even as leaders, to pass on that knowledge to the next generation coming in. And if it comes from the Black community, within the leaders, we have to do house cleaning. Let's talk the elephant in the room. It's within each other. If we don't call each other out when we fail, then we have failed our Black community. Let's call each other out. If there has been organizations that have existed for 20, 25 years and there's no rate of investment, let's put them aside and bring new ones like Keep Six, like other ones that are out there, collective group. Let's do that. And as Greg said, there's now new format. It has changed. I'm glad to hear that movement, but we gotta push it more. We can't do this little dance that we've been doing for the last 10, 20 years. And good news, there are people out there that are ready to make that momentum. And doesn't mean it has to be from the government sector for funding. No, we don't have to be begging. It's a right component. This is not begging. We got to stop with that. So if anything, let's start getting together, accountability, but also within our house and within the Black community, let's call each other out. If we don't do our job, let's call the names. Let's call the organization names. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Sarah. That's pretty awesome. Richard?
I have to start off by with Paulette and Sarah's statement, accountability. I'm always for that particular point right there. Transparency and accountability is important. I think at this point in time, we must hold others accountable. We have to be transparent about the work we're doing, but also be about the where these funds are going. We need to see how these organizations that are spending this, that are getting these funds, spend it. And they need to be accountable for their actions, and we have to hold them accountable moving forward. And the other thing is that I think we definitely need to work together. We have to have a collective group to move forward and be able to help our community empower and move ahead. We have our young ladies that's out there that need that support. There's a lot of young Black women right now who wants to get into the trade sector. They don't have that support. There's great funding in there for that. So we need to be able to find out where these funding that's supposed to help these young Black women into the trades, where is that money for that support going for them? And we need to get down to the bottom of where every cent is going. And that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Daniella, what's your thought? How do we go from here, and how do we get there?
Yeah, so for me, there's a few points, and I'm going to echo a little bit of what I've heard, but recognizing that this is just a start. We fought long and hard to get to this point, and I know the determination that exists within our community. So we'll continue to push, and we'll continue to do the hard work, and we'll continue to move forward. We also need to continue to work together. We've heard the importance of collaboration and working in partnership. And then I echo what we've heard already, but we need to hold government accountable. We need to ensure that there's transparency. And lastly, I'm going to end by saying we need more representation. We need to have more Black leaders at all levels and at all decision-making tables.
Thanks, Daniella. Craig.
Yeah, I mean, I echo the accountability. I mean, we have to hold our people within our community accountable. We have to hold ourselves accountable as leaders. And yeah, there's far too many times that within our community that we support bad behavior, and we need to call it out. We need to challenge ourselves, and we need to challenge ourselves to do better. We're not worse than anybody else, and we need to demand excellence from ourselves, just as everybody else, and don't excuse it. So I absolutely agree with that. And as leaders, we have to be servant leaders. We have to be remember, at the end of the day, we're here to serve the community, and it's the community who's going to tell us whether we're doing the job or successful or not. It's not, media hits or Twitter followers or anything like that, or a paycheck, or a car or a house or whatever. It's a community, and did you do the impact? And we need to be able to measure it. Again, the disaggregated data, the money for that is going to be more transformational than people understand, because this gives us the opportunity to make our case. This is what it's about. That if we can't measure it, we can't make the case. So that's really important. Paulette, vintage is the term I would give you to use. We're not going to use the old. And so yeah, I like that idea. And one of the things I want to do, talking about the baton handoff to the youth. But we have something that I also want to acknowledge, because we have kind of many of the older leaders kind of plugging up the pipeline and not allowing the younger ones in, and not allowing them to come in and get mentored. So there's a succession plan in place. But we also have for young people saying, well, if they're older than this, they don't have any value as well. And you tend to get that, and that's just normal, right? We always, when we were 19 and 20, we thought we invented everything, and when you're 50, you think you know everything, and young people don't know anything. So we do need the kind of, I remember back when I was 19, sitting down with the Charlie Roaches and the Sharona Halls and Lennox Farrell and so on, sitting in courtroom, sitting with Dudley Laws in his office and talking strategy. And one of the things that I remember is how I looked up to the elders, but how when they were having conversations with me, they were also giving me agency. Even at that age, they understood where I was going, and some places they took advice. So it's about being able to, so the older people having enough humility and understand when it is time to step aside, and being committed to building capacity for the next generation as well. And it's for the younger people as well to understand, look to the elders, value them, and say, what can we learn from them? So it's very important that we have that intergenerational push, and it is important that we collaborate. So we collaborate, amongst age, around gender diversity, around regionally kind of way. And we have to do this collaboratively. We have to be committed to the Black communities, and it's plural because we're not one thing, we're not a monolith. And we have to acknowledge that. And we can't just stay in our lane and our pillar and think, you know, we own this and this is the major focus. It is all important. It's all interconnected. Every single piece is. And as I said, that's kind of the lens that you take. If you take it to the budget and you look and you understand that the money invested in childcare has an impact on what we do in terms of business, in terms of philanthropy. The money invested in, you know, the 88 million invested in pardons is going to have an impact in people's ability to get into, Black people's ability to get into the workforce. All of these things are interrelated. And if we take that lens and we look at the budget, we don't need the word Black. We need to look at the budget through a Black lens, an anti-oppression lens, and find out the places where it is going to disproportionately positively impact our community, and focus on those areas and figure out how do we turn those dollars Black and keep them Black and ensure that our community has a say in how those dollars are distributed, how those dollars are spent, and in tracking the data, so we're feeding it back into government, and again making sure that we're running more candidates, that we're increasing the pool of voices within government to fight for us. So we're not just fighting from outside, but there's critical mass inside as well.
Thank you, Craig. I appreciate that. Everyone will get a 1-2 minute as a close, but with some time that we have right now, I'm going to try to pull some questions and see who wants to take them. A question from Ryan O'Neill Knight was, what can we do as we wait for these funds to roll out? How do we get better prepared? I think what Ryan's actually asking. Paulette, I'll throw that to you, and then anybody else that wants to jump in on this, your answer.
I'll be less verbose to allow for others in time. We need to organize.
Okay.
We just need to organize ourselves and be prepared.
Okay. Actually, you know what? I'm going to take that and run with it. So, in a 1-2 word, everybody, Emmanuel?
I think we need to identify the particular ministers responsible for the budget lines that have implications for us and start engaging early. For example, the $400 million that is in terms of Community Service Recovery Fund. If we don't move quickly, probably a government will find it easier to go to the usual suspects that Paulette was talking about last year. Yeah. Just a quick example of the $350 million in Emergency Community Support Fund. We demanded actually in a meeting with senior leaders of those intermediaries and the minister himself that at least 3.5% of that be protected for Black communities. Because of that advocacy, we ended up having 5.9 or 5.8% of that fund. Similarly, we have to move fairly quickly to demand concrete things so that we can hold the government accountable.
Thanks, Emmanuel. I'm going to just jump to another question, and somebody else can take this one. And this is from Farah at the One Full Circle. This is an organization in Montreal that helps people on the ground. And the question was, really what he was asking, is there a known strategy for supporting French-speaking, Black French-speaking businesses, or has that been addressed, or is anyone giving thought to that? And I don't know who wants to take this one, but I'll just lay that on the table. Sounds like I have to give it to you, Emmanuel.
There are efforts that are underway at the moment. We actually met a couple of days ago with the office of Minister Joly in terms of the official language minority groups. I think what we need to do is we need to connect with the Black Francophone advocates. We have an organization, one of the 3 Black intermediaries is Group Transit in Montreal. And I think through that leadership of that organization and others in Black Francophone, we are able to push the agenda around that. So I'm encouraging us to really, as Craig was saying, to pay to the diversity, and in this case, the Francophone community is important. So there are Black intermediaries at the moment, like Group Transit, that could be contacted to advance this.
Okay, thank you very much. I know there's a group of us that are here together trying our very best, and I think it was Emmanuel or somebody that coined the phrase, which is demystification of what we're seeing and what the budget means, and and to provide some ideas. And I think it's been absolutely brilliant. I am going to give everybody an opportunity as a closeout for a 1 or 2 minute in your final thoughts, whatever they may be. I'm not going to handcuff you. I'm just going to say, here's your 2 minutes, and I'd love to hear what your final thoughts is. Sarah, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Michael. Again, the main thing is I would say is please, for anybody who hasn't looked at the International Decade for People of African Descent, their theme is right there. It's very simple. The fact that the government has acknowledged about the decade and how it's implemented all the recommendation, it lays there. We can have this discussion every election coming up. We can fight for crumbs. We can have this argument as it goes on to Zooms, or we can really go after what we have. It's already there. The United Nations has implemented the development and the funding, and we're talking about billions of dollars, not the little 300 million. That is not only for us Black, but it's also for the underrepresented. Again, whenever they use the Black terminology or anti-Black racism, it includes the marginalized or visible minority. And I think it was mentioned before, we get the lower portion of it. And that's the reason of that, because they and the government, when I say they, the government and other entity being, they believe us as a Black, we're content with the basic. We're content with it. And this comes from us leaders that we need to do something about it. We need to call this out. If not, please step aside for other leaders to take the reign. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate that. Trevor, your final words, sir.
I would just leave with this point. We need to reach a critical mass for the Black community. Leaders and organizations can't do it alone. We must have the community, parents, families, young people taking part. If we want to move the system, get a transformational stage, it's going to take everyone. It's not going to be just a collection of organizations and Black leaders. When we talk about the concept of collective impact, it must include all of the Black families. If they're part of the change, we get buy-in, and they put pressure, and they get involved with their elected officials, more of what we want is going to happen. And we talked about shifting the responsibility down to the young people, which I agree with. But it also means engaging them and walking them through the processes that we may understand and be engaged in, where we need to start teaching as we empower them, right? And because the community must be involved in the change. Right? So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Trevor. Appreciate it very much. Paulette.
Yes. So I was thinking about what Sarah said and what Trevor also just said, and I'm thinking that part of the issue with our community is there's a gap in understanding all of these things we're talking about, right? So we're all privileged because we hold positions, we probably have day jobs, and we are not suffering in terms of paying our rent or mortgage and buying food. Let's be honest about that, right? That's the category we're in. We're privileged people here. And so I'm able to sit at some of these tables because because of the role I hold, right? But folks who are just as smart and intelligent as me or more, don't know anything about this because they're not fixed on it. So what is our role in bringing our community with us? It's what educational opportunities are we providing and offering here? So maybe we should be holding some learning sessions, some webinars, about the budget, right? And bring people along. Maybe we should be doing webinars about the work you're doing, Sarah, in terms of that really important work and the connection to the UN, right? Some important work that Daniella's doing on the political side. What is it like running for office? I did it 3 times. I could participate in that, right? So there's an opportunity for us to bring our community along. Teach us, Richard, about what are young people going through in terms of the criminal justice system. Teach us about those barriers, right? So there's an opportunity that we have to bring our community along, and I think that's a huge gap that we should address. I think we're at a reckoning point, especially with the raised awareness that folks cannot look away from now when it comes to Black lives and what happens to Black lives, even though we've been going through it for decades. I mean, Craig talked about some of the folks that taught us, like Dudley and Akua and Dari and Charlie. Those folks were really important to my development as a young person back then, and who I am today. What opportunities are we providing for that? Where the stories die? Do they die with us? How do we keep that alive? So I think that's important. And then I'll wrap up with just one final thing. If we're not at the table, it's quite likely that we're on the menu.
Thank you, Paulette. I appreciate that very much. Craig.
Yeah, I mean, I think a word is collaboration.
No, it doesn't have to be a word. Just your final thoughts. We've got we've got some time.
Yeah, so I think absolutely, as for those in privilege, we need to extend that privilege to those who don't have it and lift others into the space. We need to share, right? A lot of times, once people get into spaces, they try to protect their territory and they don't want to share. We have to share. We have to collaborate. We have to teach. The information that we have to teach. We have to pass that knowledge on. We can't hoard information like it's a transactional thing. We learn and we have knowledge to pass it on to others, or else it's an absolute waste of time. We have to practice self-love as a community. And as we all know, there's a global awakening. We're finally being seen, and Black people are in season right now. We'll see how long it lasts, and it's important that at this point in time we have to take advantage of it. But we've seen way too many examples of people putting themselves out there in leadership positions in our community who are getting torn down by people in the community. This is hard work, and you put a target on your back, and nobody here is worried about doing it, but you see it over and over and over again. We have to learn that when people from our community make it into those spaces, we have to hold them accountable, but we also have to support them to succeed and tell them what we demand, that they bring the rest of us behind that, because that is your responsibility. If you're in a leadership position in the community and you're in a place of privilege, you have a responsibility, and we must hold them to account. But we can't tear them down, because we fight to get into these spaces, and then all of a sudden we hear when people are in spaces, oh yeah, but they're too close to that space, so they're not. We can't do that. We can't keep playing that, running on the hamster wheel, right? We have to be strategic. We have to be collaborative. We have to love each other, and we have to support each other, and we have to lead, and we have to lead from a place of value and a place of integrity and a place of service. Okay.
Thanks, Greg. Appreciate that. Daniella?
Thanks, Michael. So this has been, a really wonderful afternoon of just listening and learning. It's amazing and wonderful that all of us were here today and were able to speak openly. And I hope, for those tuning in, that we were able to provide some clarity. I know I've learned a lot, and I look forward to continuing the fight and continuing to advocate on behalf of our community as a passionate Black woman and as a possible future representative in Ottawa. I also want to acknowledge and thank my fellow panelists, Trevor, Emmanuel, Craig, Sarah, Paulette, for the conversation that we've had today and for the amazing work that you continue to do. And I think, one other thing that I wanted to say is that, this is such an important event and discussion. This is a grassroots discussion among us as community people. So it's important that we continue to engage the community, the Black community, and create these open and safe spaces for these types of discussions in the context in which Keep Six is done. So again, acknowledging the work of Minister Hussein and the Black Caucus and everyone in government, for what we're working with and what we're discussing today. Thank you to everyone who's joined in live, and especially thank you to Richard Miller and the team at Keep Six, and also Michael Carter and Lee. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody. It's been a great discussion. Emmanuel, you started this with a big framing, okay? So before I get to that framing, I want to just ask Richard to step in for a little bit. Richard, and this is a combination of your last comments, but also what has happened here this afternoon, which I think we're fortunate enough that you have spearheaded, and it's been wonderful working with you to put this together.
Thank you. And I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming out. It's been something that I feel that our community really needed, to be able to have the voice of other members from the community to speak, but also to get that education piece. At Keep Six, one of my motto is to always education. That comes first, and being able to empower our community into moving forward. With that said, again, I will bring up the fact that accountability, us working together as a collective, is very, very important into moving forward and continue to do the work that we're doing. Again, I just want to thank everyone, and Michael, you can do the closing arguments. And at the end of it, I would like to give thanks to some of our community members, since we're speaking about community, who had got together to put a song together about our community. I'd like to just play that at the end of you saying your last closing remarks, Michael. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to just hand it off to Emmanuel in a second. All I would like to say is I thank everyone for showing up here. We reached out and asked, and everyone said yes within seconds, and I appreciate everyone. Daniella, Sarah, Richard, Craig, Emmanuel, Trevor, Paulette. It's been absolutely brilliant, and I thank you all for doing this. We need a lot more of these, and they don't have to be with us. It could be with other individuals, but we do need a lot more safe spaces to have these types of conversation, so we can flush things out, build on them, and hopefully take this from here and bring it somewhere else, right? So kudos to everybody here. And with that, Emmanuel, I will pass it on to you, sir, and I will check in with you when we have about a minute or half a minute so that Richard can play the song. Yeah?
Thanks a lot, Michael, and thanks a lot, all panelists. I think I agree with Daniela that this has been really a great afternoon of learning and exchange. I feel like we're building a movement here. I feel like we have reached a point of no return in terms of some of the challenge that we have seen since the last year and a half that have kind of amplified for us and made it so present the need to really be bold and be accountable in terms of our practice in the community. I've heard a lot of strong, inspiring words today. I've heard about collective brilliance, accountability, humility, transparency. I've heard about collaboration, servant leadership. I think today we have demonstrated that we care and empathy. We can have difficult but necessary conversations among ourselves. And I encourage us to do more of that. And I think the path ahead is one of really great work that we have to do. And the organization that I lead and the connections that we have been able to forge with many of you here and outside in the community tell us that there is hope. There is hope, but we need to be able to act, and to act with a level of integrity in order to deliver for Black community. So thank you for inviting me and being part of this. And I look forward to continue the toil and hard work with all of you and others in the community.
Thank you, Manuel. Richard, I'm going to turn it over to you so you can obviously play the wonderful song that's coming. And once again, finally, thank you all for showing up and for doing this. It's been absolutely fantastic. And I hope everybody out there was able to get something out of it. Okay?
Thank you.
Richard.
And I'd just like to say thank you to D-Men's Music Production and all the members from the community, music artists who came together to produce this one song for the community.
We've come so far to tear this world apart. It's time that we all find love in our heart. Oh, why so divided? 'Cause we all are one inside. We need to unite to make a better start. Love is the answer to love is the answer. Together and make this world better. Let's hold hand in hand, take my hand together. We are all from one land. Let's love one another and build a life that's worth living, and we should treasure. Love is the answer. Together we stand. We stand.
Hi, I'm Richard from Keep Six. It's time for changes.
Together we stand. Together we stand forever. Together we stand.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thanks, everyone.
Beautiful.
Well done, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.